you're involved in production and in music production, which is not all bad for sure, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Because like I know you well enough to know you're a person of integrity, and you're not going to like be trying to leech money away from the church and unnecessarily. So where's that balance?
I still have a hard time asking churches to pay for things. Honestly, like,
yeah. See, that's why
I was just looking at stuff and like the stuff on my website is a lot cheaper than other things, and also inflation exists. So somebody was like, maybe you should raise your prices so you don't start losing money because of inflation. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, so
yeah.
It's hard for me just to take money from churches at all, but I think for me, I'm providing them a thing that I personally would buy for my church because it will further the gospel. So
that's a way to look at
good.
it.
And this is so a little bit about Nathan. Like you've done church planting, you've been on staff at churches. Are you currently on staff at a church or leading worship somewhere?
Okay. I am leading worship, but I'm not on staff.
Okay, cool. Just as a lay leader. Yeah. So you've got lots of experience in kind of all sides of that for sure.
And our current church I think it's a similar size as Cherokee. I think
about 350 somewhere in there.
Okay, so we're like double the size of Cherokee. I was wrong.
Wow.
Okay. So we have a budget of tech things and lights and stuff. And I'm a deacon, so we were just doing the budget of the church. I'm also a worship leader, so I like see those together. And so like our lights are going out, and so on the budget was a very large number for stage lights, because stage lights are expensive. And I'm like, oh, I do not want to spend that. That's gross. I want to put that somewhere else. But also, if it's black in the sanctuary, it's going to be really hard to see stuff. Like, so it's so hard at all times to do that. And the bigger your church gets and the bigger the production gets, I think it's easier and easier to lose sight of how much money you're spending in regards to the real world examples.
That's fair, yeah.
Like a church like that regularly, like, one of our deacons actually came from a church that was very large like that. And he talked about when he was on their board, they added a new sanctuary and their lighting budget was $1.5 million for the lights in the new sanctuary. And to that church, it was like, well, that we have to do that because that's how big our sanctuary is. So that's how much we have to spend. And it's not like they were being overly extravagant, but when you have a 10,000 person thing with live streams going out all over the world, that's how much lights cost.
Right.
And so I think it gets really hard when you get churches that big to realize what it looks like to the world, the amount of money you're spending.
No, that's really, really good. And I love your heart and I love your attitude in that, because you have this like reluctance and this like, even when it's necessary, right? Even when we have to spend it, it's like, I don't love it because I know what other things we could be doing. And this is probably outside the scope of this episode, but someday we'll talk about like, have we created this monster that we unfortunately need to keep feeding and telling ourselves?
That's why I didn't want to go with that.
And that's outside the scope of this. We'll talk about that another day. But yeah, so when it comes to like conversations like this, I think churches in that position, like Prestonwood, like the church that you mentioned, you think of any of those big ones, they get desensitized to, oh, well, it's just a few $1,000s. Like, just a few $1,000s. Like, that's a lot of money, considering like your church, but that's like over 10% of your church budget, right? Or somewhere in there. I don't know what your church budget is, but
$14.
Right. Yeah. So like
feels
small
like
churches, church plants, they're like, if we had a couple $1,000 extra to spend, like that would move mountains for us. It would go a long way.
Right.
If they had at least a little bit of hesitance and like we're somehow able to articulate that, like we understand that this is a lot, that this is extravagant, this is XYZ, and we toil over it because part of us didn't want to do it, but we wanted to do this and we knew we had to do that to get there, as opposed to like, it seems like anytime you see interviews, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but they're very quick to like, well, we had to do it because of this. And they're unapologetic, right? And I think it would go a long way. Like, not that it's all about PR, but at least showing people that we are conscious of what we're spending and we are conscious of what we're doing. If there was this like, yeah, we really tried to find a way to not have to spend $60 million for this, but knowing what goal we had, to your point, Stephen, we knew the goal and we wanted to achieve that. And this is the only way that we could do it.
And I think that's why that video looks so bad, because they clearly did not try to not spend that money.
Right. Yes, there was no spare
drummers. Like nobody thought like,
what can we
might cost a bit?
Here?
Like, yeah.
Well, you should have seen the original proposal. There was a 747 that was going to be
right. Yeah.
So do you think, so you mentioned like the temple, right? It's like covered, like adorned in gold, like lined and all of this stuff. But like, does any of this, like, so then you look at 1 Timothy 2:9, 1 Peter 3:4. I'll read both of them, or 3 and 4. So likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty, self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire. So again, specifically speaking of like the worship setting, like not ordained and overly showy, like the individuals of the church should do that. Same thing, 1 Peter, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of your hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be in the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. Do you think that also applies to like the showy things
100%.
That the church should do?
If you look at James 2 in the light of those two texts, that becomes very clear. And David Platt actually has a great discussion about this in his commentary on James. That's that whole passage about showing favoritism in the church, right? You see a wealthy person come in and they get a seat of honor at the front. You see a poor person come in tattered clothes, maybe they're homeless or whatever. They sit in the back, out of sight, out of mind. Like, we don't want anybody to know that you're here. But this wealthy person, we're going to make sure that everybody knows that they're here and what value they provide. So you take that passage about not showing partiality, because James levies a pretty heavy like condemnation against those acts. Then you combine it with those about living modestly, living without just this posture within the context of a church as a believer of humility and modesty, not like sexual modesty, but like physical modesty, right? Yeah. That creates a pretty significant problem, because when you look at things like this, flying drummers in the air, is that an appeal to wealthy members of the church, or is that an appeal to poor members who don't know Christ?